Sir, can we start the session?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. It is with immense honor that we have the second session of Dr. R. Bhadran Foundation's Smriti International Interdisciplinary Webinar Series. Uh, the speaker of the day needs no introduction. An erudite scholar, academician, painter, administrator, the Pro Vice Chancellor of Kerala University, Dr. AJAYAKUMAR, the recipient of the first Guru Shrestha Award. After the days of awarding the first Guru Shrestha Award, we received many calls. We can still remember the fact that people who have contacted us over these few days after the declaration of the award commented on a particular aspect that the award was apt and it was given to the right person uh, uh, who is worthy of this award. We have no criticism. Usually, that must be accepted uh, uh, for the fact that after the declaration of an award, people will come up with many criticisms. But this time it was all different. Uh, we are so happy that you are with us at this very important, troubling times of our generation. So the topic that we are discussing today is also a very relevant one. So I welcome Dr. Ajay Kumar, Pro Vice Chancellor of Kerala University, to to do the honors. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Actually, I am extremely honored to have been selected for the first award instituted by R. Bhadran Foundation. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank the organizers of Bhadran Foundation and who are actually planning a series of lectures on divergent topics connected with literature and culture. It is indeed an honor to participate in this lecture series. And the topic I selected is pandemic as a cultural experience. It is true that the COVID-19 pandemic is a contemporary experience, even though we witnessed, not we, the human uh, generation witnessed several other pandemics in the past. This is something that is happening in the present, and we are living with the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is true that we may be very skeptical about how far we can understand this pandemic, its various nuances, its divergent impacts, how it will affect our society, our life, our culture, our economy, and our politics. I think that skepticism is to a certain extent true, because looking at COVID-19 pandemic in the present has its own limitations. The main reason is that COVID-19 pandemic is not just over, it is continuing. Waves after waves, it is coming again and again, creating lots of troubles and problems for the humanity all over the world. We have the experience of the World War, the World War First and World War Second, like that. It comes in the form of a series. Two attacks are already over, and it is predicted that there will be a third wave coming soon. So it is a kind of, or it has become a kind of recurring experience. And because of that, it will be difficult to comprehend the experiences associated with it and develop a proper understanding of its impacts and its influences on our life. But at the same time, everybody accepts the fact that COVID-19 is not just an ordinary epidemic. It is not an ordinary disease. It is something that has transformed our life substantially. Our life has been, life and our experiences have been transformed considerably during this period under the impact of COVID-19. And so it is our duty to look at COVID-19, to develop our own views about it, to collect materials connected with the experiences of various people during this period, and to develop an approach towards COVID-19. So we cannot do complete justice to this. At the same time, we cannot keep away from it. And that is the situation that we are in. So any attempt to evaluate the cultural impact of COVID-19 on human race has its own weaknesses, but that does not prevent us from attempting or making an attempt to do that. And on the other hand, it is comparatively easy to look back at the earlier pandemics or the earlier experiences and develop a kind of analysis, a kind of reading of earlier experiences, experiences of the past, experiences that happened in the past can be analyzed, can be interpreted in our own way. It is comparatively easy. So this lecture with this skepticism, with a clear understanding that the analysis that we make will not be complete in any sense, will not be in any way a final word, or it will not be able to look at all the aspects, all the after effects of COVID-19 in our life. It is just a beginning, the beginning of the understanding of COVID. In fact, COVID can be compared to the experiences of life, which changes again and again, which is not something that is static. If you look at the history of the pandemics briefly, you find that pandemics appeared in different centuries. The first pandemic that we can say, as we know, as recorded in history, happened centuries before. That is the plague of Justinian that happened in 6th century AD, the plague of Justinian. And as a result, about 25 million people died. And then in 14th century, the bubonic plague affected about 22 million people. And then again, in the 17th century, the Great Plague of London it wiped away about 1/3 of the population in London. So in all these cases, we find that the number of people has been affected by, who have been annihilated by COVID is very, very big. And the Spanish flu in the 20th century, early part of 20th century, led to the death of about 500 million people. So this may not be a complete history of the pandemics. Many pandemics happened in between that were limited to certain localities. But in the past, what happened was that the situation for fast spread of the pandemic was not there as it is there in the present, because of the kind of connectivity that we have in the present. COVID-19, unlike the earlier pandemics, spread very fast to all parts of the world, almost all parts of the world, very quickly. That is the difference that we find between the pandemics that came in the past and the pandemic that is attacking us in the present. And regarding the COVID-19, we can say that it began on 9th January 2020. 9th January 2020 is important because it was on this particular date that the Chinese researchers have made a preliminary determination of the virus as a novel coronavirus. Corona was there in the past as well, but the novel coronavirus was identified on this particular day, 9th January 2020. And as of now, we can say more than 26 lakh people died. The number may be more. And not only that, human life has undergone total transformation during this period. We all know that the most peripheral changes, the lockdowns, the curfews, quarantines, social distancing, the use of mask, hand wash and sanitizers, etc. All these are some of the peripheral transformations, peripheral changes that we identify very quickly. But we know that there are several other changes that happened underneath in the human life, the day-to-day life of human beings. We learned several routines, several new practices, several new ways of doing things, new sets of lifestyle. So lockdown has transformed our life. And it is said that the life after Corona, after COVID-19, will not be the same as it was before the attack of coronavirus. More than that, lockdown has left millions of people jobless. So it has affected the day-to-day life of human beings in a very horrible manner. And we know that we are all always following the updates on COVID-19. Every day we get people recovered, and list of containment zones. More than that, in social media, yes, in social media and in newspapers, in the visual media, in television, everywhere, we find reports on COVID-19, reports on the precautions that we have to take uh, while going out, while attending office, while attending ceremonies like marriage functions, etc. So everywhere we are in one way or other confronted by the disease COVID-19. There is no escape from that. And more than that, what we find is that our education system has been completely shattered by the attack of COVID-19, and the offline classes give way to online classes and sometimes online examinations. And I think the last 2 years, students didn't get even minimum classes offline. So the educational system is heavily affected by, heavily damaged by the attack of COVID-19. It is not just the educational system, every sector for that matter is much affected by the disease. So it is not just a disease, it is something beyond that. And that is why we are forced to understand and analyze the impact of COVID-19 on human life, on human culture, and our day-to-day life. And it is true that we have many similar examples of sharing of experiences of the pandemic, because some of our very famous works are certainly a kind of enumeration of the disease. For example, Decameron, the famous Decameron by Boccaccio, is such a book which speaks about the experience of a pandemic. In Decameron, you find 10 people, 7 ladies and 3 boys, who escape into, who shelters themselves in a secluded villa, which is near Florence, because they wanted to escape from the plague. So in order to escape from plague, they keep themselves secluded in a small villa. And staying in that villa, they narrate stories, about 100 stories. And this Decameron. So Decameron may be the first witness of a pandemic, a first literary work that bases itself on pandemic. We know that Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is modeled on Decameron. It was a common model that many others also followed. The Arabian Nights, different stories that are not connected. And all these stories are brought together in the form of a book. So Decameron is such a book. And it is now found that Decameron has a huge number of readers in the present century, especially after the pandemic. People started reading Decameron. And that is because they find their contemporary experience similar to the experience that is described in Decameron. And Daniel Defoe's work, A Journal of the Plague Year, is another work that describes a pandemic, the bubonic plague of 16 1965, he described in Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Pandemic Year. And we know that there are several other works, the famous works like Death in Venice. We will discuss that later. Death in Venice by Thomas Mann is can be considered as a work that speaks about a pandemic. And so there are many. But at the same time, we find that the contemporary experience of lockdown uh, is to a certain extent different from the earlier quarantines and uh, experiences in one sense. There are certain common factors, that is, the large number of deaths is certainly one something that is similar. But at the same time, we find that apart from the tragical experience of death, in the contemporary COVID experience, we find certain new experiences. And these new experiences are connected with our contemporary economy, contemporary capitalist social system, etc. And one thing that certain thinkers identify here is the plight of the migrant workers, which is almost absent in the earlier pandemic periods. So the famous philosopher, contemporary philosopher, Sisek points out this particular experience as something that is different from the earlier experiences. Who are migrant workers? We also find migrant workers in our own locality. A lot of people migrate or they go outside the country as migrant workers. And something that is common to these migrant experience of these migrant workers is that they don't have any kind of protection that the so-called regular workers or the approved workers get. They don't have any protection. They don't have access to the the kind of support that the government provides to its subjects. They are out of all these governmental support. So the plight of the migrant workers is something that is totally different from the plight of the so-called ordinary people, ordinary workers, ordinary employees. And we know that in India, in the first wave, during the first wave of COVID-19, the experience of the migrant workers were disastrous because most of them were forced to move back to their home, which is far away, hundreds of kilometers away, several hundreds kilometers away. So it is, we can describe that experience as a kind of reverse migration. A reverse migration happened during this period. Several factors led to this. It is said that the sudden declaration of the lockdown was one reason, because people didn't get time to go back. Another thing is that nobody was aware of the kind of the magnitude of the disease at that time. We don't know how far it will prolong, when it will end, etc. There was no idea about that. So there was total confusion. So as a result, what happened is that a lot of people decided to go back home because they don't have any money. They don't have any kind of facilities in the place where they stay. They don't have money to pay the rent even. They lost their job. So they're forced to go back home. And since they don't have money and there are no vehicles, they have to walk. And we know how many people died tragically during that period. So the plight of the migrant workers is something that is shocking, something that is
Sir,
extremely tragic, and
excuse
something
me,
that
it's
is
not
extremely
audible.
difficult. Okay, okay, okay.
Hello,
Uh,
sir.
Actually, it's audible here.
Yes. Okay, it is not audible to certain people. Is
Might
it
be a
because
problem
of
with the
your
network connection,
microphone
sir.
or?
Yeah, it's audible. Yes,
Okay,
yes,
okay.
yes. Many are responding. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I can hear only
Okay,
a
thank you.
little bit.
Sir, please check your network. I mean, others can receive the audio.
Okay, so I will continue. So
Hello?
we can call it a reverse migration.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, please mute your mic.
Yes, sir. Please continue.
Okay.
So it's okay now. You continue.
So actually, the attack of COVID-19 in the contemporary period resulted in a total breakdown of the so-called highly developed democratic social system that we are very much proud of. We confronted the weakness of that system, because there were no proper facilities for uh, actually addressing the issues of the people, the migrant workers especially, and even the ordinary people. The health facilities were also highly limited. So the whole weakness of the system was revealed during this period. And it is also true that our celebrated democratic system revealed its flaws during this period, because we find that democracy is a system where everybody gets equal share of their power and equal share of their opportunity, etc. But we found that during the COVID attack, people didn't, or they were not able to get medical attention at certain locations. I think majority of the places, even during the second wave, we found in Delhi and several other cities, people, I think they are uh, uh, trying hard to get oxygen, with oxygen cylinders waiting on queue in front of the hospitals, etc. So that is certainly a shocking scene. So we find that the very democratic system that we are proud of, that we think is extremely good and will solve all our problems, has shown its weaknesses, and that is evident during this period. And we are also very much proud of our civilization, the great civilization of the human civilization, and the vulnerability of that civilization is also exposed during this period. And I think we can explain that idea further, because we found that we are a race, that is human beings. I'm speaking about the human beings in general. We're considered to be a kind of a race that dominates the whole world. And the European civilization gave birth to the idea of humanism. And what is humanism? Humanism focuses itself on the centrality of human beings. Human beings are considered to be at the center. They are a hegemonic race. They have power over all other beings in this world, all other animals in this world. So humanism places itself places human beings at the center and keeps all other living beings on this earth at the margin. And that is the idea of humanism. So humanism has been questioned in the contemporary period. So the human beings thought that, not to speak of the differences, the East and the West, the colonizer, colonized, etc. Human beings in general, we find that they thought that they could keep their hegemony over all other living organisms because they are civilized, they have very sophisticated weapons, and they have knowledge, they have everything developed, cities, developed lifestyle, etc. But what happens? If you look at the contemporary experience, you find that it is a microorganism, COVID, a virus, a microorganism that is destroying slowly the human civilization, the so-called powerful human race. And can we think that our weapons, the neutron bomb or the hydrogen bomb or any other sophisticated weapons are powerful enough to face this challenge? No, it is not. So here we find that the human race fail in confronting the attack of a microorganism. So that is really serious because this is a clear indication of the failure of humanism and the failure of human hegemony over the universe. And it is a clear indication of the need for change in our attitude. So there is something called human ecology, the idea of human ecology. Human ecology speaks about the interdependence of human beings and nature. Interdependence of human beings and nature. The interaction between man and nature. We know that it is not something new because we came across several such ideas from the ancient past to the present. Gautama Buddha, Confucius, all these people tried to propagate the idea of man's dependence over nature. We know that our great literary works like Shakuntala tried to propagate the idea of nature as something equal to human beings. Nature, elements of nature are characters in that poem, Shakuntala. So we find that this is nothing new. And the great romantic poets, they hailed nature. They also tried to consider nature as the guide, the guardian, and the everything that we can depend on. So the various philosophers and thinkers and poets, they considered nature as something that is close to human life, human beings, etc. But our experience is that man or human beings moved far and far away from nature, slowly, far away from nature throughout history. And this movement away from nature has resulted in several problems. And the attack of COVID-19 certainly once again reminds us about the importance of man's relationship with nature, the need for a kind of integrative approach, interdependence of man and nature. And it is true that man tried to overpower nature through various means. We know that the capitalist expansion, that is colonialism, the kind of destruction of nature in Africa by the colonialists, It is described in Heart of Darkness, the famous poem by famous novel by Joseph Conrad, and the kind of imperialist expansion to America or the Americas. The colonial invasion has destroyed nature to a great extent, and industrialization also resulted in large-scale destruction of nature. And various economic and political transformations also resulted in the large-scale destruction of nature. So, even though now and again poets and philosophers cautioned us about the importance of man's connection with nature, it is a fact that nature has been destroyed. Man has been moving away from nature. And we come across several such uh, lines and comments in various poems and novels, etc. So we find that this is the experience of COVID-19 really forces us to once again think in favor of moving closer to nature. And this is not just a kind of idealistic projection, but it is something that is extremely needed for the existence of man. It is not a kind of a propaganda, just a propaganda, but a kind of practical duty that we have to perform in the contemporary period. So, moving away from a human-centered approach, we have to move towards an integrated approach, a holistic approach in which man lives in association with nature. And I think that this is certainly one of the important teachings that the COVID-19 gives us. And more than that, we find that certain studies about COVID-19 also focuses on another important idea, that is the need for collaboration, cooperation among nations, among human beings, among communities, among societies, etc. And what is the background of this? We know that now the idea of globalization has been developed with a view to transform the world as a small village with lots of connectivity between all sorts of people living in different parts of the world as a village. But we know that it has not become a reality. Globalization helped in developing business, developing economy, but it has not resulted in large-scale collaboration between people belonging to different places. Even people within the country, we know that several kinds of fights or several kinds of differences still exist on the basis of race, on the basis of caste, on the basis of class, etc. All such differences still exist, still continues. So globalization has not attained its aim as such. That is true. But in the present, we find that we have been confronting a society where people find themselves isolated, alienated. We know that from the past, a lot of such experiences have been shared in several literary texts, beginning from 18th and 19th centuries. For example, the famous novel Anna Karenina begins with a very important line that is like this: happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And in the beginning of the novel, Tolstoy refers to that particular house where there is no kind of communication between the husband and wife. He says the wife had discovered that the husband was carrying on an interview with the French girl who had been a governess in their family. And then he says that uh, this position of affairs had now lasted 3 days. And not only the husband and wife themselves, but all the members of their family and household were painfully conscious of it. Every person in the house felt that there was no sense in their living together. So this is the kind of beginning that Anna Karenina had 2 centuries before. And later in the beginning of 20th century, you found T.S. Eliot writing about a similar experience. In several of his poems, you find such experience. And very, very explicitly in one poem, that is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, there is a particular line, "Let us go then, you and I." So the reference to you and I in that particular line refers to the kind of division that occurs between individuals. So the alienation was certainly one topic that was discussed again and again by critics as well as writers, or the individualistic approach of people that continued even now, and it is still continuing. So the kind of division, lack of communication between people, between people who are very intimate, supposed to be intimate, and that exists even now. And the famous philosopher Zizek says that the experience of COVID-19 teaches us a lesson, another lesson, a second lesson, and that is the need for collaboration, the need for true friendship, the need for mutual support. And that is needed not only between individuals, but also between nations, various societies, various groups, and people living in different parts of the world. We need collaboration and not confrontation. We need mutual support and not war or fight. This is the need of the hour. So COVID-19 teaches us that what we need is a kind of collaboration. And we find that another important aspect of this particular experience is the kind of failure of the social and political systems that we are very much proud of. I referred to that earlier, the kind of democratic system, the failure of the political system, the capitalist system, which is supposed to bring lots of, that means development, so-called development. But we found that even in developed countries, highly developed capitalist countries, the governments found it difficult to manage the situation properly. So what we need is a new kind of development, a development that takes into consideration the basic needs of the people. It is not profit that should matter. It is the well-being of the ordinary people that should matter. The well-being of the poorest that should matter. It is not competition that is needed, but it is collaboration. We know that the contemporary social system bases itself on competition and profit. So what we have to understand from the contemporary experience is that we need collaboration and mutual support and a kind of attitude that is beneficial to the poorest sections of the society that lives around us. And so what I feel is that the COVID experience gave us several new kinds of understandings about life. It gave us several new experiences, the experience of quarantine. We know that the idea of quarantine or the experience of quarantine is extremely hard, or it is something that is really painful. When we are forcefully quarantined, it becomes even more painful. But what is quarantine? Actually, quarantine, the term refers to a period of 40 days in which there is the original meaning. The original meaning is that it is a period of 40 days in which a widow has the right to remain in her dead husband's house. That is the original meaning of the term quarantine. In the 16th century, it meant a period of 40 days. That is, a widow, after the death of her husband, is allowed to continue in her husband's house for 40 days. And those 40 days are termed as the quarantine period. And later, it had several other meanings also, because when people from Europe began to move to their colonies in large numbers, and when the ships come back to Europe, the people on board of the ship may have several diseases. So when the government suspects that the people on board of a ship has certain diseases that may spread, they will ask the ship to stay in the sea for 40 days. And they will not be allowed to come to the shore during that period. So for 40 days, the ship is kept in the sea itself. And that is also termed as quarantine period. So originally speaking, the quarantine means 40 days isolation. 40 days isolation. Now it is termed as a period, not 40 days, any period of forceful isolation. That is the present meaning of quarantine. So anyway, quarantine is certainly a kind of experience of the contemporary COVID-19, just as it was in the earlier period. And different people have different experience of the quarantine. And social distancing is another painful experience. We know that distancing, social distancing, it is termed as social distancing because it may be confused with other kinds of distancing. Because distancing happened in the past at several levels. There were discriminations of various sorts in the name of color, in the name of caste, on various levels. Distancing or discriminations happened. But this distancing is different from that. So it is not distancing of the person, it is social distancing, distancing of people in general. One person should keep distance from another person. That is distancing. Even then, distancing can certainly have its own psychological impacts on human beings, cultural impacts on human beings, because it can create psychic issues. Because distancing is preventing an individual from entering into a close, intimate relationship with another person, making of love, making of intimate communication. Everything is prevented. That leads to psychic problems. We came across several such experiences depicted in novels, plays, and poems, etc. And the Sue story, Albie's Sue story is a very good example of that lack of communication. So that is also a kind of distancing. So distancing actually exists in the contemporary period because it is related to alienation, the experience of alienation, lack of communication between people. But the famous philosopher Sisek says that the experience of distancing, which is forceful in nature, forceful distancing that we experience in the contemporary period may lead to a kind of development of a kind of attitude of community life among people, because when they are forcefully distanced from others, they may desire for the warmth of love and affection of other human beings. So this may lead to a transformation in the attitude of the people. They will become more benevolent, more loving, more passionate to others, more careful about others. Because in the contemporary experience of Kerala, we find that many people, a very ordinary experience, I would say, that is also an indication. Many people come forward to contribute to the Chief Minister's fund. Many people come forward to give food to others, give support to others. So all these are shows of our affection and love and care and consideration for others. And that is a movement that develops. So COVID-19, just as the experience of the 2 years destruction caused by the deluge, we find that this experience also leads us to a kind of experience in which people develop more kind of affection and love and community life. The desire for community life will be there more than in the past. Or the kind of alienation and the kind of displacement that we have in, or several writers and thinkers have been complaining of in the past, may disappear in future because of this realization. So such transformation may happen in human psyche, in human life, in human society after COVID-19 or as a result of the experience of COVID-19. So we cannot properly identify the kind of transformations that may happen in future in a total fashion or in a comprehensive fashion. But at the same time, we find that there certainly will be a different world. And these are some of the points or some of the ways in which the society is going to behave in future. And that is certain. There will be more collaboration, more love, more affection, more kind of more intimacy for, or more desire for community life in future, or that should develop. We should give away the kind of mad kind of competition and desire for profit. And we should understand that the life is short and this is the time for love and care for others as well. We should understand the issues of others. Life is short. And such a realization certainly will come. I think that is happening now. And instead of competition, we should try to share experiences, share resources, and that is also going to happen. So in the field of education, we find that a lot of transformations are happening. One is the usual term that we use is online teaching and learning, etc. That is happening. But more than that, what we find is that education is slowly becoming a kind of activity that is happening outside the class. So far we have been connecting education purely to the classroom. because teaching and learning happens. That is what we believe, only in the classroom. And that myth is being broken in the contemporary period. Learning becomes an activity that happens everywhere, in the computer screen, the mobile screen, at home, in the bus stop, in the park, anywhere and everywhere. We can learn, we can teach. So a kind of revolution is happening in the field of education. At the same time, it is also true that the sudden transformation in the education field may create lots of problems for teachers as well as for students. And we find that there are about 40% of students are considered to be outside the internet network. They don't have internet facility. They don't have the kind of gadgets for online learning. And that is certainly an issue that the education sector faces. But at the same time, we find that we cannot be blind to the kind of transformations happening. We should use it positively. At the same time, we should support the students who are not able to access internet. So what I'm saying is that since my topic is connected with the cultural transformation uh, created by COVID-19, we can certainly identify this, the transformation in the field of education, as one such experience. It is certainly one. And it is also true that the mode of education will certainly is going to change in the future, and it is going to be more and more student centric rather than teacher centric. But at the same time, we have to, the teachers and students will have to adapt themselves to the new situations and create platforms which will help them to continue teaching and learning in the modern or the contemporary ways. And that is going to happen. So as when I began, I spoke about the limitations of this talk. I'm very much aware of the limitations of looking at the impact of COVID-19 at a time when COVID-19 is very much in force, very much active. But at the same time, we are uh, not able to, or we may not be able to keep away from making such an attempt to study this experience. That is why I decided to talk about this particular topic. I don't know whether you agree with my views. Anyway, I am glad that I have been invited for this function, and I congratulate the organizers for uh, actually making this a very important event, for organizing in the online platform a series of lectures on various topics which will be interesting to the students as well as scholars and ordinary people. So thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's time for your queries, doubts, and discussion on relevant points. If there are any, you can please raise it now. If there are no such queries, I think, are there any? No, I think we can conclude the session, sir. Thank you very
Yes,
much, sir, from the bottom of our hearts. Such an enlightening session. Thank you in particular for the time spared amidst your busy schedule. Wholehearted thanks also goes to the participants who have gathered here. Thank you, everybody. ഫൗണ്ടേഷന്റെ പേരുള്ള ഹൃദയം നിറഞ്ഞ നന്ദി ഉണ്ട് സാർ. കാരണം ഇത്രയും വളരെയധികം ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുള്ള സമയമാണ്. എപ്പോഴും വന്ന് ഇത്ര സമയം ഞങ്ങളോടൊന്ന് ചെലവഴിച്ചു. ഫൗണ്ടേഷന്റെ പ്രാരംഭ ദശ കൂടിയാണ്. ഫൗണ്ടേഷന്റെ ഈ ഒരു തുടക്കത്തിൽ സെമിനാറിന് കൂടിയ എല്ലാവരോടുമുള്ള സ്നേഹവും നന്ദിയും രേഖപ്പെടുത്തുകയാണ്. സൗന്ദര്യോന്മുഖതയും സാഹിത്യവും ഡോക്ടർ ആർ ഭദ്രന്റെ വിമർശനത്തിൽ എന്ന വിഷയത്തെ അധികരിച്ച് ഡോക്ടർ ശ്രീശൈലം ഉണ്ണികൃഷ്ണൻ നാളെ 5 മണിക്ക് പ്രഭാഷണം നടത്തുകയാണ്. എല്ലാവരെയും അവിടെയും പ്രതീക്ഷിച്ചുകൊള്ളുന്നു. നന്ദി സർ. ശുഭദിനം എല്ലാവർക്കും.
താങ്ക് യു വെരി മച്ച്.